Hey, let's speak with Natasha Hausdorff, barrister and legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. Natasha, good to have you back on with us. There does seem to be some fairly widespread condemnation of this. That's not always a surprise, looking at some of the rather interesting leaderships we have around the world. Maybe that's another story. This from Starmer, and of course we heard what Mr. Trump said. What's your reaction specifically to the attack yesterday in Qatar?
Well, the attack was in some respects not surprising given the warnings that Israel had issued that Hamas leadership would not be safe, even if they were hiding out in Qatar. And indeed, President Trump's recent warnings that the refusal to engage with US proposals, really the last chance that the Hamas leadership and the negotiating team were being presented with was fast passing. But the reaction really does underscore a level of hypocrisy which is deeply shocking. This is, of course, an entity, a sovereign entity, that has been pre-7th of October and certainly post-7th of October hosting, supporting financially, but also providing all sorts of resources to the leadership of this internationally prescribed terrorist organization, and not to have heard any condemnation of the context in which this strike occurred, and this, resounding suggestion that Keir Starmer and others are condemning it, is perhaps surprising given, what international law says about combating terror organisations and certainly not supporting them in your country.
So in that sense, the big accusation seems to be, this happened in a sovereign country and that therefore it crosses a line. That in itself to you, even as a lawyer, is not a reason to join in with the condemnation from America and the United Kingdom and others.
No, there's pretty consistent state practice. The war on terror, of course, gave rise to many strikes against terrorists in third countries that were harbouring them. Osama bin Laden was taken out by the Americans in Pakistan. The US has also struck terrorists in Somalia, in Yemen. So in that respect, there's nothing new here. And we've heard, the world and his wife, to a certain extent, on many media stations decrying this as a violation of international law. It certainly isn't. Neither is it unprecedented. Israel is at war with these Hamas terrorists. This is the leadership. And those specifically that Israel was targeting have been directing the Hamas war against Israel over the last 2 years now. They've also been, unfortunately, stalling in negotiations. So on every count, this was perhaps certainly a long time coming, but one can also hope that this change, this radical change that Hamas now know they are not safe hiding out in their penthouses in Doha, may indeed lead to a resurgence of real efforts to get those hostages home, 48 hostages that are kept now nearly 2 years unlawfully in these barbaric conditions.
So in terms of America's position on this, this was rather curious. Yesterday we initially heard that Mr. Trump had kind of okayed this this attack. That turned out not to quite be the case, but what we do know is that it would have been almost impossible to happen without America knowing, given that Israel would have had to have flown planes and missions over American airspace. What is your take on what the reality of that slightly muddled story is?
Well, the issue is that the Americans have a very substantial base in Qatar, and so it's unthinkable that Israel would have taken this sort of action without some form of tacit approval from the Americans. Israel didn't, in fact, fly into Qatari airspace. These missiles were launched very precisely. This was a targeted strike from outside the airspace, so we understand. But, of course, it's not the first time we've heard contradictory remarks from President Trump. If you recall, in the run-up to the strikes that America took part in against Iran's nuclear facilities together with Israel, there was quite a lot of diversion tactic, if you will, and certain comments that were put out publicly by the Americans that didn't really follow through with their intents and their approval, and indeed in that case direct participation in those strikes. So I think we have to take, certainly on the basis of past experience, these public statements with a degree of skepticism, understanding the context. Of course, America presents itself as an ally of Qatar. It would necessarily have to say something negative about this strike, because it is a significant new aspect of taking out Hamas terrorists, even, as I say, in third countries. But that doesn't necessarily portray the full scope, I think, of America's position on this.
And just on the peace talks itself, Mr. Trump did allude to the fact that, I think via his press secretary at the White House yesterday, that this does nothing for the peace talks. This essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially takes things backwards. Your reaction to that?
Well, I think he also said something along the lines of taking Hamas terrorists out was generally a good thing and a valuable goal. But what we've heard in the last few weeks from the president is increasing frustration, not just from the president, I should say, but also US representatives to the negotiations, increasing frustration with Hamas, increasing irritation, and a real suggestion that time was running out for them. So the timing of Israel's strike against these terrorists hiding out in Qatar is perhaps less surprising in the context of what the president has been saying over the last few weeks.
I do wonder, and I sometimes want to cry for our politicians, but mostly down to the ineptitude of what we hear. It would be great for Keir Starmer. He may wish to acknowledge his disquiet on what had happened. It's a free country. He can have that view. But it would have been just maybe handy to say, but, you know, simultaneously, some of the bad guys have been taken out. This is, you know, reiterate, this is a terrorist organisation. These people are the horror stories of our modern story, and they need to be removed as much as possible. So, you know, congratulations to Israel on that point. We never hear that, really, do we? We always hear this sort of rather touchy. I mean, Trump does get closer than most to being sort of fairly off script and brutally honest about this stuff, but we don't hear it anywhere else.
You're right, and unfortunately the clip that you played earlier from PMQs really does seem that the Prime Minister was speaking off of a Hamas-prepared crib sheet. Utterly extraordinary that the condemnation here should be on Israel and not the Hamas leadership that continues to hold on to these hostages, that has plainly violated international law, but also Qatar. Let's not forget, you know, the Qataris came for a state visit. The red carpet was rolled out for them. Not only have they been harbouring terrorists, contrary to international law and real international law, I should say, binding UN Security Council resolutions under Chapter 7 passed after the September 11th attacks, but also the information war that Qatar has been waging against Israel should not be forgotten in this context. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister seems to be one of the latest victims of that very information.
Yeah, indeed. And I was just about to say that. You've rather preempted it, Natasha, to be honest. Can we just quit this idea that Qatar is some sort of progressive, wonderful place to be? You know, try being either just a female, a non-Muslim, gay, or anything like that in Qatar, and then you'll get to know roughly what they're all about. I mean, let's not run away with the fact that only a little while ago we were complaining about football being held in that country because of its horrendous human rights abuses, and then suddenly today Keir Starmer's talking about it as if it's Benidorm.
Extraordinary, the modern slavery that occurs there, but also the substantial amount of funding and influence by the royal family of Qatar across universities, government institutions, think tanks, into politics. I mean, all of this has been coming out as extraordinary news, and one really does have to pause and think where these lines in support of the funders and encouragers of terrorist organizations around the world, where they're coming from and who's been writing them.
Spot on. Natasha, great to have you on again. Thank you. Natasha Hausdorff, barrister and legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. Some of you will agree with every single word she just said. There might be some of you who think actually she's off the mark on this one. I think the last point that I made to her was the bit that was making my teeth itch, talking about Qatar, this sovereign nation, like it's the bastion of all democracy. You know, this is a horror show of a place that has more human rights abuses than Amnesty can even fit on a spreadsheet, for God's sake. This is not a good place. It's not a good regime. And it's harbouring terrorists, of course, as was evidenced by that attack last night. Whatever you think of that.